So
Okay,
welcome everyone
great.
who's coming in. I think we just finished our prayer call, so it usually takes people a couple minutes to get out, do what they need to do, come back in.
Yeah.
So but we are just also getting the message out.
Hello.
Hello.
Who said that? Bye
This
bye.
is
Hi bye Bob.
Bob. Yes.
Welcome. Vaibhav and his beautiful wife had their 16th wedding anniversary. Was it 2 days ago now?
Oh,
Yes.
2 days ago. Okay.
congratulations. That's
Thank
wonderful.
you. Thank you.
Good. Well, we have a lot of people that said they're joining, so I think we'll just give them a couple minutes, Abby, and
You bet.
give them a chance to join. Vaibhav is in India with an organization called Udhar, and
Oh, of
they do,
course.
yeah, you know most of these names. Now you'll start to see some faces, which is
It's
kind
so
of fun.
nice to get some faces. Yeah.
They've been doing their own grant writing as well for some time, I think. So they have some experience, which is good. And then Godfrey
Wonderful.
from Burundi. Hi, Godfrey. And he is helping me with doing many, many different things as it relates to DML.
Sure.
Nikhil is with you, Vaibhav?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. Then here comes Reverend Jonathan from Sierra Leone and Edward from Togo. And Diomed's been trying to join from Burundi, but he keeps dropping. Morning, Edward. I can say good morning to you because you're still in the US.
Oui, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Comment ça va?
Hello.
Ça va bien?
Yes, well, we, yeah.
Where are you
In,
right now? Are you in Maryland?
yes, I'm in Baltimore.
Baltimore. Okay, good.
Mm. I am
Good.
going to Pittsburgh for the weekend.
Are you driving?
No.
Mhm.
Greyhound bus.
Oh, on the bus. Okay.
Okay.
All right, good.
Next
Very
time I
good.
come to Michigan.
Yeah, although the weather is not exactly pleasant right now. It's rain and cold.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but that's fall. There's Lacey. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, it is chilly,
Sure.
but we have sun today.
Well, that's good. We have sun right now too. So there you go.
I'm hearing the rain is moving out.
Diomed, welcome. You're able to get on. Oh, you just muted. You're unmuted now, but I still can't hear you. I don't know if your mic is on. All right. Well, we want to be sensitive to time. And as we teach in DML, we never want to punish the people who are on time by making them wait for those who don't keep time. So let's get started. I'm going to open. Actually, Edward, would you open us with a word of prayer?
Seigneur, nous voulons te dire merci pour ta bonté, ta grâce et ta fidélité. Merci pour ce moment de réunion d'études et de formation. Merci pour la formatrice et tous ceux qui ont organisé cette réunion. Nous prions que ton Esprit Saint nous dirige et nous accorde ta grâce, surtout la sagesse et l'intelligence de servir ce qui est nécessaire. À toi la gloire. C'est dans le nom de Jésus nous avons prié. Amen.
Amen. Now, I could have asked you to
Amen.
pray in English because I know you can pray in English, but that's okay.
No
There's a few
need.
people who
Uh,
understood every
Mm.
word. So, all right. I want to introduce you to Abby. Abby has been helping with DML since February, March of this year.
March, I think.
March.
Yeah.
And she has worked with other organizations in writing grants and started her own business. So we like entrepreneurs who start their own businesses. Started her own business in helping to write grants. And I think we were your first client. Is that right? All right. So I'm going to say we are the first and we are also the best. I'm just going to claim that. She
Amen.
doesn't have to agree, but I see her nodding her head, so that's good. But one of the things that Abby's been helping DML do is to identify foundations and working, a lot of times we have not done a lot with foundations over the years because my sense was you really just need to have a relationship. But coming to find that there are more opportunities than previously understood in terms of foundations, that you don't have to have a person on the inside. There are places that have these opportunities for you to make applications to, kind of on an open basis. A lot of foundations say, they don't accept without an invitation, they won't accept anything, but we're finding those who do allow that. And I think something that's been interesting, and if you pay attention on what's up, I've been sending you some different opportunities for writing grants, because what we're beginning to see is that foundations don't want to work through what they would call intermediaries as much as working directly. So DML would be considered to some degree an intermediary. Not always, because we work through you, our partners who are doing the work. But some of them want to not work through us, but work directly with you. And that's great. So what we want to do is, when we see those opportunities, I put them out on WhatsApp. I'm not always sure the capacity of us to follow up with those. And so that is, Abby and I were talking about that as she runs across organizations that want to give directly in Africa or directly in India or in Pakistan or wherever, or Francophone, or whatever part, that when we put those opportunities out there, that and have some confidence in some of those next steps, or at least we begin the dialogue for what that looks like. So I asked Abby if she'd be willing to share. We talked about doing 2 sessions, a session today, and then 3 weeks from today, a second session. And so today will be somewhat making sure that some of the general bases are covered. And then in 3 weeks from now, we'll go a little bit deeper as well. But the goal is, we talk in DML about sustainability, that it's important that you find your own income streams. We have our sustainability projects. We challenge you to raise 10% of your income locally and to increase that annually. I know Edward works with Crew. They have similar goals that people must be working on their own sustainability. So this is another tool that can help you move in that direction. And so I don't want to take a lot more time. Lacey, I'm going to let you, I'm going to spotlight you first, so that, and then you can share your screen when you're ready. But we'd like to just tell us a little bit about who you are, and then we can go ahead into the content. And at any point, feel free to write questions in the comment section or comments. And then we'll also have some Q&A time at the end for some discussion as well. But Abby, I will be quiet now and turn it over to you.
Awesome. Yes, I am so delighted to be here and to actually put some faces to names that I've heard, work that I'm familiar with. It's really wonderful to just be with you all today. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in, because I know our time is short. I'll leave this up for a second though, just so you all can see a little bit more about me. And my background, although Renita covered it really well, but I also wanted to own that I am speaking in English, which is my primary and first language. So if I'm going too fast at any point, or if I'm using jargon or phrases that are unfamiliar, please feel free to throw a note in the meeting chat and say, hold up, slow down, because this is all content that I'm very familiar with and excited about. And so I know that my words can run off with me. So feel free to slow me down if that is an issue at any point. but we do have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to try to move both efficiently and thoroughly through what we're going to discuss. And we're going to get familiar with our grant funding, what it means, what it actually can do for you, what it takes to find a grant opportunity. Once you've found something, how do you know it's a good fit for you? That's all going to be in here as well. Talking about managing those grant funds. So I know that after these 2 sessions, you guys are just going to take off and start securing funds for yourself. So how do you know that you're prepared to manage that funding accordingly? And some honest like benefits and challenges of this type of funding. I want you all to go in with your eyes wide open. And like Renita said, there's going to be time for questions throughout. So please go ahead and drop any questions as they arise into that chat box so that when we get to those points, I can pause and read through and make sure that I'm answering your questions. But we will also save some time at the end for any remaining questions. So let's go ahead and dive on in.
Sorry,
What? Oh,
Sorry. May I ask some question? One question.
sure. Kick us off.
Will you share with us the PowerPoint, or we may take notes ourselves, or I don't know.
I will share the PowerPoint. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And that's actually, thank you for that reminder that I will be sending an email out after this session that will have my notes, but also a handout with some resources available to you. So don't feel like you have to catch everything as we're going through it.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy.
My pleasure. Okay, so first of all, we want to make sure that we are working with the same common definition and understanding of grant funding. Grant funding is financial assistance that's provided to an entity or to an individual with no expectation of repayment, but based on specific criteria and usually with restrictions or a defined purpose attached to it. So let's dig into what that means. Some common characteristics: it's going to be non-repayable, meaning a grant is typically made outright without expectation that you're repaying it unless the terms of the grant are not met. Then the funder may request that that funding is returned if it's not used appropriately. This type of funding is also purpose-driven, so it's made for a specified use. Grant makers are typically identifying both kind of their overarching philanthropic goals as well as specific goals for a grant. And so you're going to want to keep both of those levels in mind as you are writing your grant applications. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but keep that in mind. And then you're also going to be prepared for a competitive and formalized process here. So many grants are awarded through an application, and there's a review process where a lot of different applications are gathered, and then they're being evaluated based on their alignment with the specific grant goal in mind, but also the goals of the organization as a whole. I'm just going to open this chat box a little bit more for myself so that I don't miss you guys. Okay, finally, they are also conditional. So there's going to be terms outlined when you receive this type of funding, and they may include how and when the funds themselves are being expended. So you might have a grant term that is 6 months, a year, 2 years. How long do you have to complete the work that you've said you will do? There are also typically reporting requirements that you want to have in mind even before you complete the application, because if you are unable to fulfill reporting requirements, you probably don't want to take the money in the first place. And then any other guidelines or things that are important to a funder might also be included. So in my work, I've encountered things like, we will pay for money, or we will pay for this program, but we're not okay with our money being used for food, for example. So you need to fund the food portion of this budget from another source. So things like that can come up with in grants, whereas you might not see that with other types of funding, like a donation from an individual. They're probably not going to be that specific about how you spend the different dollars. Okay, this is a good spot to pause and just make sure that I'm not missing any questions here. It looks
all
like we're
of the-
okay based on the chat box. So
Yeah,
I'm
and I'll
going to
keep an
keep
eye on the
going.
chats too, Abby, so
Okay,
I'll
thank
let you
you.
know.
Perfect. Thanks, Renita. Okay, so now this is where we're going to exercise our chat box real quick. Based on what we've just discussed, how is grant funding different from, say, a donation? There's a lot of right answers here, but what are some of the things that pop out to you as a difference between grant funding and a donation? Go ahead and put any answers or things that come to mind in the chat box. Restricted or unrestricted. So often donations are typically unrestricted unless you've had a specific conversation about a specific program, but there are typically a lot less restrictions that come with just an outright donation as opposed to a grant application. Really here, like honestly, a huge difference is just the method of asking and managing that relationship is going to look a lot more informal with a donation as opposed to a grant. Yes, the specific purpose. Donations can be recurring, whereas a grant is often a one-time opportunity. You're applying for something specific. And if you're going to get additional funding, even from that funder, you're probably going to have to apply again. Reporting requirements are a lot different than a donation. You typically can call someone up and say, hey, the program went really well, or this is how things are going at our organization. That looks a lot different as opposed to a grant where you're likely going to have to submit a report or just provide more information, right? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bump us on to our next one. How about how grant funding is different from a contract for service? So like a fee for service, or you have a specific thing that you've been hired to do as an organization. This might be a little bit out of the norm. How would you know that a funder is willing to sponsor a specific project you have? That is a great question, Emmanuel, and I promise we will get into that further into the presentation, but that's a really good core question. Contracts for services can also be very competitive. That's a really good point. And yes, a donation doesn't typically focus on a specific project. Absolutely. A contract for service can actually be very similar to a grant. One of the key things that I've noticed in my experience is different from a contract is that you can have a different structure for payment with a contract perhaps than a grant. So in my experience, this could be different for you all based on your context, but often a contract is more on like a reimbursement where you have to do the work and then you bill for it afterwards and you say, here's the work that we did, this is how much it cost. Whereas a grant, you're often going to be able to get paid before the work is completed. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move us forward. I think if my technology wants to join me. And then, okay, how about a loan? There's really one key difference here for a loan. What's different about a loan and a grant? Loan is repayable and a grant is not. Great, thank you. The other piece here is that loans typically aren't going to have a programmatic element. A loan is typically going to be a financial agreement, whereas with a grant, there's going to be concern about what is the money actually used for? How is your program growing or being impacted by that money? A bank probably doesn't care so much. about that piece. So really what I wanted to just drive home here is that if you haven't managed a grant before or you haven't gone after a grant before, there is a learning curve here. It is a little bit different. There's a higher level of accountability typically with a grant than you may have experienced with some of your other funding before if you haven't had anything like that. So I just want to own that up front, that there is a learning curve here. So let's go ahead and talk about how we find a grant opportunity. This is going to be a little bit different based on your context. So I want to give that kind of caveat up front that wherever you are, there are going to be different opportunities available to you based on where you're located. However, there are some things that we can still talk about, and the handout that I'm going to send afterwards is going to be really useful to you for those resources, and we'll actually have direct links for you to start looking for types of funding. Okay. Grants, first you want to think about who can make a grant. And this will, even though who in your community is making a grant varies by location, who is able to make a grant is likely going to be very consistent across contexts. So you want to think about who in your region or your community is able to make a grant, which is likely to be a foundation, a corporation, a government agency, or even an individual or family system, okay? So here in the US, it's very common for, multiple generations to pool their resources and decide to give gifts together. And that is another way. Those are foundations typically here in the US. But just think about who in your region, who in your country might be doing that kind of work. There are also, like Renita mentioned, there are funders that are thinking more regionally, like thinking about the African context and how do we fund work that's happening in Africa. There's a link in the handout that I will send to you for what's called the Siegel Family Foundation. And there are these associations like the Siegel Family Foundation that will bring together funders that care about similar things. And those are great resources in terms of identifying who's out there that might be doing or might be interested in the work that I'm doing. Okay, so there's my broad caveat. Now we're going to dive in a little bit to, okay, what are the resources here? Online search tools are something that I think we're probably all fairly familiar with, but we want to be a little bit careful in the grant context because online search tools are very broad, and we want to use them to help narrow in on what's out there. So I use them especially if I'm having a hard time figuring out, if I'm having a hard time finding funding or finding funding for a specific project, I like to use them to help me think about what are the other ways I could frame this work. So what are the other terms that I could use that maybe I haven't been using to find funders that would be interested in the work that I'm doing. So I know with DML, we don't typically talk about our work as business development, but there might be funders out there that are interested in business development and that's how they're advertising their work. And yet, if you read about what they care about and how they care about doing their work, you can find, oh, they actually might be interested in the discipleship ministry that DML is offering, because there is some shared kind of philosophy, but that's not necessarily going to pop up on a search. And so we want to use these online search tools to help us get creative about what we're looking for. I'm not naming specific search tools right now because in the handout that I'm sending, you'll have all of those. So even naming them right now, I know might just be confusing. So I'm sorry that it feels a little bit vague, probably. Then, oh yes, and Renita makes a good point that sometimes you can also find a lot of funders that are not super connected to you. And so this is a research process. It does take some time to sort through all of the options out there. I also want to make a note because you're all working in different contexts and locations, that this is a really good reminder to develop your local networks and connections, because other nonprofit leaders in your area or other partners that you have in your region are more likely to know where the dollars are, and who's out there doing what. Folks that have been taking grant funding for longer will have tips and tricks that are more specific to your location. And so I just want to remind you that there is a wealth of knowledge probably already in your network. I also wanted to highlight again, corporations in your region, businesses have a pretty big motivation to be involved in community building work. And so think about who has a presence in your region that might be interested in giving philanthropically. And I also, like, if you are just getting started in grant funding, or if you're trying to expand your grant funding opportunities, I really encourage leaders to keep talking about it and to talk to board members, to talk to volunteers, to talk to people that are coming through your programs, and say that that is a goal of yours, because you don't know who's hiding already in your network, so to speak, and might have resources or connections that you weren't aware of because you had never talked about wanting this to be part of your work. So I always say, yes, you don't actually have to have a relationship within a foundation to be able to apply for their funding. But also, if you're trying to expand your knowledge of what's happening in your region, then that network and those relationships that you already have, because you are all well-connected, well-resourced people in that regard, leverage those, lean on those in this area as well. Okay. We are going to chat quickly about evaluating a grant opportunity. So let's say you have found something, it seems promising, the funder seems interesting. How do we know that this is actually a good opportunity for us? So the first, just number one logistical thing is, when is it due? And when does the funding need to be utilized by? If you're needing to submit an application super quickly, if the deadline has passed, it's not the application for you probably. Or if the funding is needing to be utilized in a time frame that you actually cannot meet because of the nature of your project. Maybe this is a project you're hoping to do, but you don't actually have staff lined up or resources lined up. Those are all questions you'll want to ask yourself as you're considering an application or an opportunity. Also think about the process. What will it take to complete the application? Do you have the manpower? Do you have people who can help you do it? Do you have the resources that you need to submit a quality application, which often comes down to, do I actually know the nature of my program well enough? Do I understand the reporting requirements? Are we able to collect the data that we will need? DML is in a really good position when it comes to data and reporting. You all are very well acquainted with qualitative and quantitative reporting measures, but these are the kinds of things that you want to think about before you even submit or take the time to write a grant application. I want to acknowledge that grant applications, they take time. It's the reality of it, right? And so you want, as leaders that have a lot of demands on your time, you want to make sure that this is a good use of that time. So we also want to think about alignment. Are there conflicts between our organizational values and mission and those of the potential funder? So first off, looking at a funder's website, any information that they offer about how they came to be, what they care about, why they exist in the world. You want to make sure that you're okay with that makes sense for you. But also then looking at the specific project, does our project meet the goals and requirements of the grant opportunity? If this grant opportunity is all about health and health outcomes, I need to be sure that my project can speak to whatever the goals are of that funding opportunity. If I'm not doing anything related to health, if I'm not tracking anything related to health, then this isn't a fit. And it doesn't feel great when you see something exciting, especially if there's a lot of money attached to it. It can feel like I'm walking away from a lot of money. You probably weren't going to get that money if you're not in alignment. So I think a really rigorous evaluation process is really important, because a no hurts a lot more than I didn't apply. Okay, and then finally, capacity. This speaks a little bit to the process question, but just think again about, can our organization meet the financial and programmatic reporting requirements of the potential funder? These are questions, so especially when big dollars come into play, this is something I've seen a lot with nonprofits. When we are doing work day to day and feeling the strain of finances, seeing a big dollar amount can sometimes trick us into thinking that those big dollars will solve all of our problems. And because we are all Christians on this call, I'm just going to make a note that we know that money does not solve all of our problems, correct? There's a lot of ways that relying on money can lead us astray. And so ultimately, like Ronita mentioned in the chat earlier on, we want to come back to our mission, and we want to come back to whether or not this money would actually be good for our organization. And that, I hope, is also a prayerful conversation. But at the end of the day, these are some of the questions that I hope can also guide that, to decide, is this money actually going to help us move forward, or is it going to create some more problems for us and we're not actually ready for this kind of opportunity? Okay,
Can I add something there real quick, Abby?
please do. I would love that.
So, and you might find some organization that is doing funding for business development, and you're like, wow, that's perfect. That's us. But they say nothing about religion, nothing about faith. And when I mentioned the Venn diagram, most people that want to fund faith-related things want to fund church planting. They want to fund Bible translations. They want something that's very directly related to evangelism. And so it's very difficult to find those organizations that will both help us do with business development and appreciate the fact that we are non-negotiable in terms of our faith alignment and teaching from a biblical perspective and working with churches. So the temptation is going to be to say, well, I can apply for this and I just won't mention that we are Christian. Or I won't, we'll just ignore that part. If we get the grant, we'll just do a workshop that doesn't include faith and just get the money to be able to help people to improve their business. That is where mission drift enters in. When you begin to shift who you are based on the opportunity, that's when a big red flag needs to go up. And we need to trust that God will provide those funds to help us do what he has called us to do, and not chase the money and bend and shift who we are. So just another.
Yes. No, thank you, Renita. Thank you. It looks like I did skip one here, but I think we've covered it pretty well. Just that you want to make sure that the needs that are outlined in a project or a potential funding opportunity are actual needs for your organization. So this just is another layer of sometimes when there's money, we can almost create needs out of that and say, well, sure, I could probably use the money for that thing. But then we're neglecting the needs we actually have. We're neglecting the actual call, the urgency that really exists for the potential of money that is out there. So I think we have adequately spoken to that piece of it. But are there any other questions that you have? Feel free to drop them in the chat, or if there's something that we need to clarify here. Especially on evaluation. I want to go back to that question that was asked earlier and just make sure I covered it.
Can I just add something about the network piece that you put in?
Yes, absolutely.
Something very interesting happened with Isaiah from Burundi. And he has really taught me a lot about networking. So there was a grantor that we had written to, and they said, "Oh, we're going to be in Burundi," and I'm like, "I'm in Burundi," and so we got together when we were in Burundi and had spent some time together, and we got back to the U.S. And Isaiah happened to be in Grand Rapids, and this grantor, this foundation, then said, "Hey, we want to meet with you, and and Isaiah as well." That that donor, that foundation brought along somebody else, a different foundation as well to that meeting. So suddenly there's two foundations that are there. And then I find out from one of the foundations that they're not really interested in DML. They're interested in UCCD in Burundi. Um, and they ended up funding them and then but it was good. I mean, what we learned and what Isaiah's
Mhm.
been really good at is by connecting his donors. And a lot of times we don't want to do that. We're afraid of telling people who is funding us. And Isaiah has been very open with that. I just want to encourage you as well. If you have different donors, tell them who you're working with. They're not going to say, "Oh, you're getting money from them, therefore we're not going to fund you." They're going to say, "Oh, you're getting money from them. You must be credible. We want to come alongside you as well." And so, this is just an encouragement to say, let's be very open and see how. In fact, a donor that Isaiah connected us to ended up funding DML. So it goes back and forth. But
Mhm.
he's very unique. I've not seen that from many others who say this is who we're getting money from. And just remember, it's not all competition. It's also about collaboration.
Yes. Yeah, I think especially I just love that story too, but I I think the grant process in particular can um it is it's inherently competitive, the nature of it. And yet, at the end of the day, funders, whether they're working through an institution or they're working just as an individual, there are always people on the other side of this process, right? And so, um, even in this kind of disjointed, or you can it's easy to forget, I guess, that there are just other people on this other side of this equation at times. That collaboration piece really reminds us of our shared humanity. And at the end of the day, um, funders and those of us that are doing the work, we're all working towards a vision of an improved world and a better world where people are able to flourish um, more effectively. So thank you for those reminders, Renita. And I love that story. Just reminding, like, let's bring people together, even when the process is competitive. We don't have to be competitive about it. And we don't have to have that mindset of scarcity as we enter into these relationships. Okay, I see another question in here about potential value conflicts that might arise during grant implementation. Whew. Um, that's such a good question. So I think when it comes to grant implementation, sometimes your challenges can actually be more internal even than between you and the funder, although it absolutely could happen that as you're going through the implementation process of a grant, um, your understanding with a funder perhaps of what this work actually looks like or what it entails can come up. But I actually, in my experience, perhaps you all have experienced different things, um, but in my experience, the conflicts can actually come up internally more than anything else about what is most urgent, or where does the focus of the funding really need to be. And that is why I do want to emphasize, even before you've applied for anything, this kind of the tools and framework that I'm hoping to equip you all with through these two sessions. I really hope there's an investment internally before you're even submitting an application to try to avoid some of that. The other piece I would say is um, I think transparency and like really good communication with your funders is a really good way to avoid conflict in the grant implementation stage. the hope is that like by the time you've secured the funding, they're familiar enough because you've been transparent in your application. You've done your due diligence to make sure there's a alignment as much as you can. It's not always guaranteed, but that you'll avoid a lot of conflict because you've been transparent throughout that process. The other piece I would say is if you're noticing as you are going through the grant implementation process, or let's say what's even more likely, I would say, is that you set out to do something and then for whatever reason plans had to change. There's a natural disaster and you couldn't conduct workshops in a particular region or whatever it is. There's always things that happen, especially over the course of an entire year of grant implementation. There's always things that come up that are unexpected. That is a really great opportunity to communicate with your funder and say, hey, this just happened. It's not what we planned, but here's how we're adapting. That gives the funder an opportunity to say, we're concerned about X, Y, and Z, but I don't know, 95 times out of 100, 99 times out of 100, that's not going to be a concern as long as that communication transparency is there. And they feel like, oh, if something changes, if the plans have had to alter, I can trust that this organization is going to adapt in the way that is needed. They understand that they are not the ones on the ground doing the work. You're the expert in that situation. Of course, that's not 100% the case, but I have never had an issue where if I'm being upfront and proactive, I'm not waiting until the end of the grant period to say, wow, this really didn't go as planned. But as soon as something comes up and we're like, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to hit all of these markers, or we're going to, but in a different way than we planned. That's as long as you're being proactive about that and communicating that early on. I've never had an issue there with a funder being like, how could you? Because they know a year is a long time. Anything you want to add there, Renita?
Yeah, can you give an example? I can think of a bunch of examples of where your value conflicts might come in internally. You just need to list them off. I think. Yeah, give us a couple examples.
Oh man. You probably have more recent ones than I do just because I'm not currently in an organization, but I have found, I think it comes with like, what's the most urgent thing in our program? What do we need to do today? But go ahead. What are some of the ones that came to mind for you?
Padding numbers, saying that the actual cost is a lot higher than what it is.
That's a great one.
That padding not just financial numbers, but padding actual numbers that we're going to reach huge amounts of people, and the bang for your buck is going to be there when you can't actually do that, and then you just end up in trouble.
That's a perfect one.
Values in terms of mission drift, of representing who you are and what you do. I just think that the value conflicts are huge, and every time we see a grant opportunity, I'm tempted. I'm tempted to
always
say, I think if we just twisted it a little bit, very mild in the wording, even to distract. I think it closes the door for God to be able to bless that. We have to be committed completely to who we are, know who we are, what our values are, and align to that and trust God to provide. But the temptations are many, many, many.
Yeah. I want to quick answer this question from Reverend Jonathan about if your need is greater than the grant opportunity offered. I think it's still worth applying. If that's the only reason you're hesitant to apply, great. Because grant funding, I hope, is always seen as a piece of a puzzle. It's not the be all end all. It's not the thing that is going to, financially save your program, but it's a piece of the puzzle. And so, yes, that's totally fine if you're saying this is going to be a part of it. Some funders would rather be a part of a larger project than covering the whole thing. Most of them, honestly, they're used to being part of a larger project, and that's often what they want. So absolutely, if that's the question, go for it. In my
Sometimes
mind,
they don't even want to be more than 10% of the solution. They want to see that you
that's
have a
right.
diversified income stream.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to answer that question, Anthony, later on, if that's okay. And chat real quick. We've already kind of been talking about managing awarded grant funds, so I think we can do this part pretty quickly. But there's a couple logistical things because I feel like Renita and I have been speaking to kind of philosophically and relationally how you're managing your grant funds. But logistically, if you are awarded grant funds, you receive notification, hooray, we're so excited to work with you. The next step is typically, not always, but either in the award letter, there's going to be some terms that you need to agree to, or an actual contract saying like, these are the terms, this is when the money's going to be spent, this is what reporting looks like. If there's any sort of reimbursement schedule, that's going to be outlined there. I just want to encourage you, read it carefully. Put those dates in your calendar right away. From a logistical standpoint, that is super important to make sure you're documenting really clearly what they have communicated to you. And you want to make sure that any reporting plans that are outlined in that contract or the agreement or whatever, you are making plans for how you're going to be doing that throughout the year with your team. You all know this. If you've ever tried to report on activities that happened even 6 months ago, it is hard to remember what happened 6 months ago. Sometimes it's hard to remember what happened a week ago. So you want to be building in those plans as soon as you get that awarded. Then you also want to make sure that you are prepared to appropriate the funding accordingly and then to track your spending accordingly and be ready to report back. A lot of organizations aren't going to need something super detailed, but you do need to know that whatever money came in for whatever project went to that project and wasn't used on something it wasn't supposed to be used for. So all of that needs to be in place before you even spend a dime. Please make sure that you've figured that out and are ready. Okay, and then when you report back to funders, so I already talked a bit about being proactive and not just waiting until the end of a reporting period, especially if things have shifted. Even if the funder does not require a specific report, maybe they don't have a format you need to fill out or specific questions, please plan on following up with them a year after or whenever the term of your funding expires. Please plan on communicating something to them. So even if it's a general reporting format that you use for DML or you have a newsletter that you send out, that's fine if it's specific to the funding that they provided, but make sure you are communicating something to them. So like Renita and I have been kind of harping on a little bit here is like, this is a relationship, even though there are some more formalized elements to it, make sure that communication is happening. Oh, and this is great too. You can offer a mid-year report, whether or not it's asked for, and some of your funders, they might require multiple points of report throughout the year. So there's not like a model for this that as soon as you start receiving grant funding, you can have everyone on the same schedule. That would be so lovely, but that's not quite how it works. Each funder has their own specific requirements or things that they're looking for. And so you want to make sure that you are first following whatever they've requested, but then you can add these additional elements if they aren't requesting things in a specific format. Is there a specific time of, grant applications should be sent whenever they are due? So no, there's not specific calendars or that would be lovely if it was like a school year or something when we knew everyone was receiving them, but no, they're available throughout the year. Some funders will make their applications available on what's called a rolling basis, which just means there isn't a specific deadline. You can submit whenever is a good time for you, while others will have actual deadlines that you need to meet. Sometimes funders only make funding available once a year. Sometimes it's available 3 times a year. Sometimes it's available quarterly. So this is where grant funding really becomes its own beast and its own thing to keep track of, because these deadlines really can be all over the place. On the plus side, it does mean there's not like one time a year where you're totally swamped with applications. So there's pros and cons to both models, I guess. Okay. I think we're going to go ahead and move on from there
10
to
minutes
just
left.
talk. Yeah, exactly. I don't want to lose all of our Q&A time at the end. So I want to talk really quickly about some pros and cons. Some of them have probably already been made apparent, but I want to just be really transparent with you all as you're considering this as a potential way of funding your work. So some benefits of grant funding. The amount of money can be pretty significant. You could get a large lump sum right up front. And if you're doing a new project or you're wanting to scale something, grant funding can be a really good way to do that because it's that quick influx of cash that allows you to actually do work at a faster pace. It can also, as we've talked a little bit about throughout the presentation, it can open some doors to future resources. If you're able to actually, complete a project at a scale that you haven't been able to do before, it gives you the chance to prove yourself as an organization to other funders and to say, look, this is what happens when our program operates at a certain level. This is how many people we're impacting. This is what the outcomes for those people look like. This is how a community is actually being transformed because of our presence here. When you don't have a lot of funding, sometimes it can be really hard. You just know that that's like a slow build of being able to prove your impact. And so grant funding really can do that. And it can open these doors to other relationships. There are some funders that are a little bit more risk averse. And so they want to see more proven results, or they want to see that other funders have already been part of the project before they're willing to fund, especially a grassroots or a locally based organization. They might have some more questions about that. Whereas when they see those things that they kind of consider to be credibility, that can really be beneficial to your organization. Okay. However, there are some challenges, and some of them have already come up in our conversation today. If you have an urgent need, the process of applying for, receiving, managing grant funding can make grants really not the best solution, whereas a donation might be able to bridge a gap faster and more effectively. Grant funding, if you're really facing something urgent, probably isn't going to be the best fit unless it's a really unique opportunity. Also, reporting requirements. If you are reporting, and this is where we can talk about mission drift again and whether or not a funding opportunity is really a good fit for your organization. If a funder is asking for information that you don't track, you don't collect, you're not really all that interested in, and you would need to create new mechanisms of reporting for, your staff or your program members or whoever could be asked to be doing things that really are kind of outside the bounds of what you're already doing. And I know there was a question about kind of operational funds and how those can be taxed in order to carry out a specific project. If you're needing to expand staff time just to do the reporting for a grant, it's just not necessarily a benefit to your organization, right? At that point, we've talked a lot about the possibility of mission drift. And if we're not identifying great opportunities, or if we're ending up tied to partners that aren't actually aligned with us, it's just really tempting. It's something that comes up all the time with grant funding. And so I just want to name it again. There's also, we talked a little bit about the staff time that's required to both identify and then request those funds. That is just a reality. And when you are also trying to secure other types of funding, you do need to make some decisions about how you should be spending your time and what activities are going to be most beneficial to your organization. Finally, there can be some geographical challenges, and in my handout, I'm going to explain a little bit about how you can get around this more specifically, but Some funding opportunities that are located, for example, in the US are not available to organizations that are not registered here as a nonprofit. And so that that can be a real challenge because it doesn't mean that the work that you're doing where you are is not valuable and doesn't matter. Or isn't even aligned with these funders. Some of the work that you're doing is super aligned with these funders, and yet they want to be able to give in a certain way, and it's just about the legal process. So there are ways around that. If you have a fiscal sponsor that is located in the US or has a 501c3 status in the US, they can basically assist you through that process, and you can use their 501c3 status. And I know DML has done that in the past for partners on a limited basis. And so if that is something that is coming up that you feel like there is a really good opportunity and the only barrier is your 501c3 status, think about DML, but also a denomination that you're a part of or an association or any other kind of affiliation. Those organizations, if they're acting as your fiscal sponsor, can define what that looks like and what the relationship is and how you need to communicate with them and make sure that they understand what they're responsible for. But that is an option. So think about that. And like I said, there's a note in my handout about that as well. Okay, that's what I have in terms of content. So I'm going to dive into your questions real quick with our last couple minutes because I don't want to lose it.
So let me
Okay.
just add there, I just remembered,
Yes.
Abby, as well, there's an organization in South Africa that will operate as a fiscal sponsor for organizations. There's a process that you go through. I don't remember the name right now, so I'd have to look that up and get that to you. They take a
Yeah, that's
percentage,
fine.
though. They take a cut. So
Yeah.
that's the only thing, but at least that would allow you to apply for grants directly.
Yeah, that can also, there are some organizations that, not to, you can feel whatever way you want about it, but that can be part of a US organization's like own business model. It actually is like being a fiscal sponsor and just allowing others to work through them. Okay, so I want to dive back into these questions. Anthony, yours was the first one. So yes, grants can often restrict what funding is used for management or the administrative, those overhead costs. This is a real problem, in my opinion. It's a big challenge. But so when it comes down to your evaluation of that grant opportunity, I would encourage you to think about what are the general operations dollars that you have available and whether or not those are sufficient to cover the costs and the gaps left by whatever this funding opportunity is. And yes, you often can add some into your budget, some admin costs. And I would also urge you, like, I say this because I know you are all people of integrity, but think about, are those is it program staff and those kinds of costs that make sure that those are included in your budget, right? Like, you want to think about administration maybe a little bit differently, but if you have people that are working within the program, if you aren't excluded from including those people, those are program costs. So sometimes people see like, oh, I can't include certain, I don't know, I'm blanking on some of the language, but just make sure that if you are thinking, oh, I can't include a salary because because they said something about administrative costs, that's not what they're talking about necessarily. Sometimes they are. So I hesitate to talk too broadly, but do think about what are the actual costs of this program, and not just in terms of materials and travel and those kinds of things, but also in terms of the people that are carrying out the program. So I hesitate to get too broad because
Let me just add
you
something
never
there real
know,
quick.
but
So in
yeah.
our integrity and finance class, if you remember, we teach about different types of budgets. If you have a program budget and that program is taking 30% of your time, you can allocate 30% of the rent that you pay for the building to that program. If your executive director is spending 20% of their time helping to administer this program. You can allocate 20% of the executive
Yes.
director's time to that program budget. So if you have a program budget, it makes it easier for grant writing than if you just have a general administration budget that it doesn't allocate things out to different programs.
Thank you, Renita. That is helpful context. Okay, I see another question about situation where grant is in conflict with faith or law, like a granting entity has beliefs contrary to the grant receiving community, and the former wants to convey theirs into the latter. I would walk away from this situation. And I have been in the shoes of the person knowing that your need is great and this looks like a really great opportunity. It's not worth the cost. As Renita has said multiple times so far, this is your opportunity and your invitation to trust that the Lord will provide in other ways. Anything you want to add there, Renita?
No, I mean, that's how so many things got challenged, right? In terms of birth control, in terms of population control, so many things that people said yes on the one side and then were forced to do things on the other side that the grantor had some desire or wanted to push on in their own agenda. So I agree. Be very, very careful with that.
Yeah, and I know we're over time, but I see a couple other questions, so feel free to hop off if you need to, but I'm going to go ahead and answer these just with a couple minutes, if that's okay. But I also wanted to note there just, no, I forget what I was going to say. I'm just going to keep going.
The question from Edward.
What's that? Yes,
Edward's
from
question,
Edward.
is it possible to raise funds for operations administration costs instead of evangelism or church planting?
In terms of like securing those funds, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, those opportunities are out there. And yes, salaries, communication, transportation. Honestly, grant funding can sometimes be an easier way to roll these in to some of your costs, as opposed to like making a specific ask for your general operations. At the same time, I would say, like at the organization that I worked for just before this, typically if we were trying to do a project and it was able to be really defined and contained and reported on, that's a great great grant opportunity. And then we're meeting our general operations costs more through those unrestricted funds and addressing those needs through through more flexible funding pathways. But there are definitely fun grant opportunities out there, especially around capacity building. Can be kind of a funky category, but if there's an emerging organization, you're a newer organization trying to get off the ground, sometimes capacity building grants can speak to some of the general operations needs actually of an organization, especially around like staff development costs or trainings or things like that. So there are opportunities out there, all that to say. Key considerations for maintaining cultural sensitivity in communication, relationships, and decision-making during the grant application and implementation process. Ooh,
Last question.
that's quite the question to end on. So one of the things I would say, I guess there's a few different things to chat about here, but think about who your audience is. So think about the funder and who you're communicating with and what their culture and background is. But I would never want you to sacrifice your own communication, relationships, decision making through a grant process. So if you are feeling like the divide is such that you are needing to change who you are, that isn't a great fit. Whereas if it is coming down to more communication style or relationships, relationship expectations, then I think that's part of cross-cultural community and figuring out how we care for one another. So, I guess this is where I would just again lean into that transparency and honesty, and just continue to show up as you are, and try to maintain that. But especially if you're working cross-culturally with a funder, there may be some communication things that need to get ironed out, or styles that might be a little bit different. And that, I think, to me, that's not disqualifying, even though it may be more challenging. And so what you may need to consider then is, do I have the time for this kind of relationship? And is that a good fit in that sense?
Can I add just a couple things?
Of course, please do.
So Udhar does an amazing job. Vaibhav, you do an amazing job at your newsletters. You put them out without being asked to put them out. You have pictures in there. You're always telling the good story. Again, unfortunately, donors don't want to hear the bad story. They don't want to hear the sad story. They want to hear the good story. So communicating, voluntary communications, pictures, what are the testimonies, the impacts, that's what they want to see. The other cultural thing is when you're working cross-culturally, you can't just say my culture is that, time is not important. To the culture you're working with, time might be important. And so you need to get things in on time. And that's what it means to work cross-culturally. You don't just get to say, this is my culture. You also have to recognize this is their culture and figure out how to respect that. So those are, I think, just two things that I would add.
That's helpful. Thank you, Renita. That is all I have. There are going to be some next steps in terms of like an assignment, quote unquote, for your next, for our next session that will be in the handout that I'm sending out. So that will come out in the next half hour, from me. So, and I've taken a picture, Ellie, of this question that you asked, because I think it actually fits better in our next session than in this one. So we don't need to take the time now. I'm taking a picture and I will cover it in our next session. Okay. But look for that email. Consider those next steps. I hope it's not too time consuming, but I think it'll be worthwhile and just make our next session a little bit more applicable, and practical if you're able to do those things. So thank you, Renita.
Thank you so much, Abby. We appreciate you and your expertise and sharing your time with us. And yeah, we will get the recording out, the handout out by email to the group that was invited. And so if you were invited by somebody in that group, you need to bug them to make sure that they forward it on to you so that everybody can have access to that. Abby, I'm just going to close with a prayer and we'll pray for you
Wonderful.
as well. Father, we are so thankful for this opportunity to be part of a kingdom that you have knitted us together in internationally, both as people who work on the field as well as those who are raising the funds for those who are doing business to create those funds. Thank you for Abby and her willingness to be in this role to help connect dots and to help this team to be able to help connect those dots as well. We want to submit that we trust you and we lean on you and we desire to both trust you for what you will provide, but also work towards that provision because you have called us to be faithful in that way as well. So thank you for these ideas. And we pray, Father, that we may be faithful to do what you have called us to do with our time, treasure, talent in a way that will build your church. Bless Abby this day and her beautiful daughter and their family as she continues to do this work as well. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 Thank you all.
All
Thank
right,
you so
thank you
much.
all. Have a good
Thank
day.
you. Thank
Amen.
you.
All right, bye-bye.
Amen. Merci.